Hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. We're going to talk about school choice today. Oh, you've been hearing a lot about it, especially since the legislature actually passed a school choice law last session. But would you believe that there are some people who believe school choice is not necessarily for everybody? I'll explain more coming up.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. School choice is one of those issues that, it was wonderful to see a toehold established in the last legislative session, but it was also a little bit daunting to realize that, the journey is only beginning. This was not the end by any stretch of the imagination. And Ron Nate, president of the Idaho Freedom Foundation, had an excellent article published just a little over a week ago at the IFF website, idahofreedom.org. And he talked about an interview that he gave to a local podcast host there in Boise who had him on to talk about, among other things, the Parental Choice Tax Credit, or PCTC is the acronym which you'll often see used to represent that, which passed in 2025. This is the question that the host asked Ron. He asked him how in the world Idaho's school choice could be held accountable if there were no mandatory testing or other state controls put on private schools. In fact, Ron says that last question came with a laugh where the host said, what you're telling me here is that Idaho should fund school choice, but there won't be controls, but it will be awesome. and the answer that Ron gave was yes, actually it would be awesome, but you have to understand a thing or two about economics. You have to understand a thing or two about incentives and competition and choice as to why it would be awesome for everyone involved. So I want to walk you through some of the high points of Ron's article, and you can decide for yourself. But I'm going to tell you right now, the refrain of statists, and I don't use that as a cuss word, but people who believe that everything that's outside the control of the state is by definition out of control, tend to ask those kinds of questions. How could anything be legitimate if the state wasn't in charge of it? Now, think about how many aspects of your life you would be willing to turn over to that kind of control, and you start to understand where maybe that's a bit of an oversimplification. So here's the article. Again, you'll find this at idahofreedom.org. And Ron talks about this host's response to him, saying, this is just one of many examples of how leftists don't understand the economics or the misguided incentives of our public education system. But he says, here's a truth bomb for you. Advocates for public education and lobbyists beg the legislature for more education money every year. And when those same advocates are asked why Idaho education achieves only 30 to 33% proficiency in math and reading for 3rd through 8th grades, and why that's persisted for decades, despite billions of dollars being spent, they claim the problem is, well, education is underfunded. And then without blinking, they say, with sufficient funding, we will fix Idaho's education problems. Essentially what they're saying is fund it better and it will be awesome. Classic. It's a good response. But here's the problem. And Ron actually identifies two problems in his article. He says there's zero accountability in that public education spending. Here's what he means. Year after year, public education gets big increases in spending. It grows its administration. It asks for new literacy funding, vocational funding, XYZ, whatever funding. But the needle indicating subpar proficiency never moves. Education spending has far outpaced population growth and inflation combined, but reading and math scores still stay in that low 30% neighborhood. So where's the accountability, right? Well, this year is different. Ron says parents finally have the choice to find education alternatives, including private schools, micro schools, online charter schools, cooperative education with other small groups of parents, or even parent-led education in their own home. Now, the new Idaho PCTC law means qualifying expenses may be deducted from their state income tax obligations up to $5,000 per child not attending public schools. You see the difference here? That's a tax credit. That's not a voucher which passes through government's hands before it gets to you. It's simply you keep more of your money by being able to write it off on your taxes or being credited for it on your taxes. And the crazy thing is it's far less than the approximately $10,400 that it costs the state to educate kids in public schools. But it promises to give families better options than being stuck in an education system that isn't working well for their child. So Ron says, sadly, legislators and policymakers seemed to know that all along because the law provides contingencies for how to ration those tax credit dollars. The law says lower income families qualify first, and then higher income families will be awarded those tax credits on a first come, first served basis. In other words, the law anticipates there will be families in Idaho that will be left out. And here's the second problem. The Idaho education tax credit law is simply too small. It's modest, limited. Ron says likely to be exhausted before all applying families are rewarded the deduction. This is because only $50 million total in credits can be reduced from income tax collections or refunded if families' taxes fall short of the education credit they're applying for. So the program is eventually destined to fall short of serving all the families who want better education choices for their kids. Now you're starting to see why, well, only some people are going to be able to have access to this. And the two big difficulties that come from under allowing the use of a PCTC, Ron says first, many families who choose alternatives to public schools will be denied the credits. And in other words, they'll be left holding the bag of expenses they thought would be reimbursed. Second, many families who fear they'll be denied the credit will never choose better education alternatives. Instead, they'll just leave their kids in less than optimal public school situations. And neither of those scenarios should happen. That's his point. He says we must change the law to allow all Idaho families the same education opportunities. It shouldn't be afforded only to the few as it is now. I love this part. Ron says, call me crazy, but I think that national anthem line, or the land of the free, refers to all the people being free, not just a lucky few. So he says, Idaho's landmark school choice law ought not be limited to low-income families, first-in-line families, or any families who qualify for some advantage over other families. The law allows for as many $5,000 education tax credits or partial credits as can be awarded within that $50 million that was appropriated for the Education Freedom Bill. And early indicators are that many Idaho families will be left wanting. Now, he points out, make no mistake, any families that are left wanting, any signs that more families would love to take advantage of the PCTC but are worried about the limitations on qualifying, those are the true indicators that private education and other alternatives, even without controls, are indeed awesome. In other words, they want it. Idaho must expand the PCTC in 2026, he says, especially given how many families are being left out. Let's not leave any school choice awesome unfulfilled. So there it is, plain and simple. It really comes down to, with competition and with incentives, you get better results. But when everything is just locked up in that one size fits all approach and it's got to be this and nothing else, nothing really changes for the better. Think of the incentive it would provide for public schools in those areas where they need shoring up to do that. Anyway, got to learn to think like an economist. That doesn't mean you have to drop everything, go back to school and get your PhD in economics, but it does help to think like an economist, or, barring, the opportunity to really, dig in and become one yourself, maybe listen to those who have paid the price to learn to think like an economist. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.